Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we have a model showcase for you guys. This is basically a type of video where I showcase some models that I own, that I have modified, and I basically just show you guys the work that I've done to these engines. So yeah, today I'm showing off my two BLI New York Central Hudsons. These are both Paragon 2, specifically the first, well this is the first run, this is the second run, or second generation of BLI New York Central Hudsons. So yeah, the one left here is a J1D with a PT tender, which is considered the passenger tender. It was the much larger tender, held a lot more coal. In fact, I believe it was the tender that held it was the largest coal capacity tender made in the US. You can see that most of the tender is actually all coal, and there's a little bit of water in the back. But yeah, and then the front here is and this is in the Gothic scheme, so the later style of lettering. And the front here we have another J1D. This one has striping on the tender, and yeah. A little history about these. So this is the Roman lettering with the striping. So the J1Ds have the Alesco feedwater heaters. In real life, J1Ds, yeah, so all J1Ds had Alesco feedwater heaters, and all J1Es had the coffin feedwater heaters, which actually looked a little bit like this right here. So you'll see that there's just two little tabs here, but there's no cylindrical looking thing. But yeah. So yeah, with the J1Ds, they have the feedwater heater, or the Alesco feedwater heaters will look like that. And yeah, so I've heavily modified both of these. Well, I wouldn't consider it heavily modified, but I've definitely put a lot of work into these two engines. In fact, I spent the past 3 days, roughly 28 hours, working almost exclusively on these two models right here. And that's because I've done a decent amount of just alterations. So in the front here, BLI, the BLI original Hudson looks kind of strange to me. I'm gonna actually move this away. So in the back here, I have a more or less stock BLI Hudson. This is basically what you get when you first buy one. And there's a few problems I really didn't like with this engine. So first off, it's got the unpainted leading truck wheels. That's common with almost all BLI engines, as well as unpainted, axle tips, as you can see here. The engine is also all painted black. Now, in photos, New York Central Hudsons looked, because they're so dirty, they looked almost black. But technically speaking, I believe most New York Central engines, in fact, basically all, the New York Central standard paint scheme would leave the smoke box graphite. So in other words, unpainted, and they'd use graphite. Now they usually use a darker color graphite, so their engines usually had a pretty dark looking smoke box. So some people often call it black. But technically speaking, it should be graphite if it's clean, that is. And so that's something else that BLI didn't really quite do. Now, this was actually Broadway Limited's first ever engine. When they first began as a company in 2001, their first ever engine was releasing the J1E/J1D in the original Paragon, and those actually had unpainted tires. But then they had the second generation of Paragon Hudsons, which had the black painted tires with a much better mechanism. And then we have the Paragon 2, which also had 2 generations, 2 runs, and then they stopped producing it after Paragon 2. But in any case, my point being is that this is like BLI's original tooling. Paragon 2 basically updated the internals and the electronics and whatnot, but the original tooling for the detail and everything like that is still stock. That's from like roughly the early 2000s. So it's honestly very impressive. The detail on these engines look really fantastic. In fact, in a little bit, I'll compare it to the brass Hudson that I just showed you guys, the J1E. But for now, I just want to show you the upgrades I've done. So again, this is a stock one. The smoke box should be graphite, but in this case, it's black. That's something I wanted to change. And the last thing is these headlights. So these headlights in the front here are very undersized. They're because of the little light tube, which you can kind of see the back here. Because of that tube, it makes the headlight look really long. It's also also just undersized, and it just looks really small and kind of wimpy and kind of weird. It gave the engine kind of a strange look. Excuse the Amtrak train going by my house. But anyways, yeah, so the headlight is undersized. It looks really strange, and yeah. And one more thing is, because the LED was located inside the boiler, and then this light tube, the light goes through this tube to the front, what ends up happening is that the light is really, really dim. And I'll actually talk a little bit more, compare this light with my modified one in a little bit later. But basically, this kind of style of headlight was undersized and it looked really strange. And that's something I really wanted to change. And that was almost a signature BLI Hudson look. Like for me at least, whenever I looked at a Hudson and if I saw this front, it's very noticeable, it's very recognizable, and I instantly know it's a BLI Hudson, along with other things as well. But this is the main giveaway for me. It always looks strange to me. So anyways, those are some things that I think they could have improved on. Again, they're mostly simple things to change. And then yeah, and the last thing I believe, let me double check my list. Oh, there's a few other things. So first off, is another thing is this huge coupler here. This is a dummy coupler, but it's the size of a Katy, the normal style Katy. It's not a scale head. It's a huge Katy coupler, or dummy Katy, meant to fit with Katy couplers, but it's a dummy. And you can see that it sticks out of the model a lot. You know, it really sticks out, and it really ruins the appearance, in my opinion. Now, in real life, these engines would have drop couplers, sort of like this brass engine right here, you can see. And so this thing really sticks out like a sore thumb. And also, finally, one more thing is, because the Paragon 2 engines, they replaced the big boiler weight here with a smoke unit. So there's a little bit of weight, but it's mostly a big smoke unit in here. The engine got a lot lighter. And so in order to compensate for that, they added this weight right here. And yeah, that did a little bit. It's definitely a pretty decent sized chunk of weight, but also it looks really strange because in real life, you would be able to see through this part, you know? It would be, you know, empty, sort of like that. And just to have this big weight here that's very noticeable, it really ruined the appearance for me. That's another giveaway that this is a ready-to-run engine. So, anyways, those are some observations that I had when I first got these engines. And so, you know, I've owned my engines for a while now. This one I'm not going to keep, but just I have it around just to show you guys what they look like stock from the factory. But so here are my two engines, and so I've spent a decent amount of time modifying these. So the very first thing, the most recognizable thing, is the smoke box here. It's graphite. I disassembled the entire engine, took just the shell, not the running boards, just the shell. I cleaned it with some 70% isopropyl alcohol to remove fingerprints and oils and whatnot, because I bought these used, and I don't know if the original owner used a smoke unit, which that one is definitely used because this front part of the boiler here is kind of melted, because the original owner definitely used a smoke unit. And again, these were built before Paragon 2, so these had all plastic shells, and then in Paragon 2 they decided to add smoke units, which basically melted the shells, and that's the reason why current BLI engines are all die-cast. At least this part area here is die-cast, or metal, to avoid melting. But anyways, it's a whole other different ramble. I actually have a whole video about that on my channel. I think it's like BLI's greatest mistake, or whatever it's called. But I talk about that in a different video. But basically, because these engines were originally tooled before smoke units were invented by BLI, this is all plastic, and so if you have the smoke unit on, it would melt. In this case, though, these two look pretty much pristine, so I assume the original owner did not. Thank God. But in any case, I just wanted to clean the area off so the paint will stick better. So I cleaned it off. I disassembled it, cleaned it. I masked this area. It took a while because there's so much piping and whatnot. So I masked it. I used Alclad 2 magnesium color for this, and I think it turned out really, really well. It's not too bright. It's also not too dark, so it's definitely noticeable. And so yeah, that's a huge improvement in my opinion. And then I went back and hand painted these black again, and then I finally clear coated it with some satin finish. But yeah, that makes the engine look a whole lot better in my opinion. And the second thing is the headlight. So this actually is a precision scale cast New York Central pile flat headlight. These castings are far more accurate to the original. In fact, I will post some photos right now. And hopefully you can see the major difference between the size of the headlights. Now this, to me, looks a whole lot more accurate. Hopefully you guys can see that. I don't know why my phone is being weird with the white balance. Anyways, yeah, these headlights look a whole lot better. They're not only just a little bit larger, but also they're way more well-rounded. They're not like super long or super narrow. They look a whole lot better. So that's another thing I did is I before I painted it, of course, I removed the original. I kept the original headlight brackets, the thing on the bottom. I actually had to re-decal 3591 here because for some reason BLI chose to letter it in yellow letters. And so I got rid of that, and I had to manually decal that again. But I kept the original number board or headlight bracket, and I just simply put the Kale Scale headlight on top. I drilled a hole through it before painting it. Then I painted it black. I painted the inside white. And then in the middle, right in the middle, you'll see a tiny little LED. That is an SMD LED. I believe it's an 0603 style SMD LED. It's a warm yellow color. And again, in a little bit, I'll show you how the light looks. But it's very bright, much brighter than the stock headlight. And it just looks a whole lot better. I think this headlight, just visually speaking, compared, just looks so much better than the original. And yeah, so the headlight and the smoke box paint was the two major things I wanted to change. By the way, unrelated, but you can see like the it's all warped, and this headlight, this smokestack's all warped as well. Anyways, so that was a huge change. Another thing I did was paint all the wheels and the axle tips black. That also really helps in its appearance. I also removed that internal weight here, and yes, it does make the engine a little bit lighter, but honestly, it's not that much of a big difference. It's not that big of a difference, especially with traction tires. One day I do hope to remove the smoke unit and replace that entire area with actual lead weight to make it a lot heavier. But that being said, it honestly pulls fine right now, even without it, and I just think it looks significantly better. It's not very noticeable. It's not a very noticeable detail change, but that being said, the original was very noticeable, at least to my eye. So I think without that weight, it looks a whole lot better. And yeah, and the final thing is the coupler. I just changed it out for a McHenry coupler. So, you know, I have a whole bunch of Katie, 158s, but for me, I don't know if you notice on any of my other engines, but I always put a McHenry coupler in the front because it's already rust colored. And also, I don't mind using a plastic coupler in the front because I'm not really double heading engines anyways. And even if I were, I don't need a metal coupler for that. I do put metal couplers on the back of engines always, but for the fronts, I usually just use McHenry couplers. It's an easy way to get rid of some, plastic scale head couplers that look good, but maybe not necessarily be able to handle all the weight. So anyways, I just installed a coupler in the front here. You can see it's a simple install. I basically just thread the coupler through and push the plastic tube through and then glued it all. I didn't glue it in place, so it does swing back and forth, but the tube prevents it from being pulled out. So I think that was a huge change. Again, if I were to put these side by side, you can just see how much bigger the stock coupler is. It looks really bad, and the new one looks a whole lot better. So yeah, that's pretty much it for modifications. Again, there's not that many, but there's just a lot of steps involved. Like, for example, switching out the SMD LED means I need to do a whole rewire. I have to take the entire thing apart. Taking the smoke unit out of the boiler is a pain in the butt. So there's a lot of work involved for such seemingly minor changes, but in my opinion, it really improves the appearance of the engine. But yeah, anyways, that's it for the front. I didn't do any changes to the tender. But I did do one more thing, and that's inside the cab. Since I already had the engines, taken apart, I figured I might as well just spend like 5 minutes and just hand paint some of those valves and gauges in there. In my opinion, that looks a whole lot better than the unpainted, which again, factory stock, it's unpainted, it's all black. So, this entire thing is molded on, doesn't really matter, but I figured painting some gauges and stuff makes it look a whole lot better, and it just kind of makes the cab look more well-rounded, especially with the factory installed crew figures already inside. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the modifications I've done to this engine. I will move on to the light section now. I'll show you what the differences between the lights are, between the factory and the custom installed lights by me. I'll show you that right now. Alright, and here we have the headlight comparison for these two engines. So again, on the left is the stock Paragon 2 BLI engine, and then on the right is my modified one. As you can see here, the headlight on the right is significantly better than the one on the left. The stock headlight configuration basically has an LED inside the boiler, and then it goes through this long tube to finally reach the front of the headlight. And what that means is that, well, first off, the headlight's very dim because the light is not right at the front, but rather all the way inside the boiler. And secondly, an even worse fact is that the headlight is significantly dimmer on the side, but if you look at it directly to the front, you can see that it's slightly brighter, and that's because you can see through the tube into the source of the light. Whereas if you look on the side, you're not looking at the source of the light, you're actually looking, on the side, and then it has to bounce through multiple sides to reach the back. So that's why it's much dimmer on the sides. In the front, it's slightly brighter. But you can see on the right here, here's with the SMD LED. It's significantly brighter. If I were to, now this is obviously Rule 17 lighting, so both engines are on dim mode, but if you turn the engines and make them move forward, you'll see that they get even brighter. So here's the stock engine. You can see that it gets a little bit brighter. And then we take my engine, turn it up. You can see the significant difference in brightness between the two engines. I'm gonna mute it again. There we go. Mute them again. But anyways, you can see how much brighter the modified SMD LED headlight is. And even if I turn down the brightness of my phone, you can see that you can really see a difference. Again, we can have them run forward again. Just a huge difference in brightness between these two headlights. So I think it's a really good upgrade, and it just makes the light not only more, you know, not only brighter, but also look nicer because it's bright on all sides, no matter how you look at it. Whereas this one only is bright if you look at directly from the front. And that's true for any BLI engine, actually, where the headlight or the LED is mounted behind the headlights. So if you look at, for example, the Santa Fe 484s, for example, they have a similar issue where if you look from the side, they're a lot dimmer, but if you look directly front, they're brighter, but they're still not very bright. And actually, I plan to replace the headlights on all of those, just because I think this, you know, the brass casting and the SMD LED combination just looks so much better. So yeah, anyways, back to the rest of the video. Okay, and finally, to wrap it up, I'm just gonna kind of do a really short, non-really scripted, just a plain kind of comparison between the BLI Hudson and a brass Hudson. So what I have right here is a West Side built by Mizuno J1E. So again, this is a J1E, this is a J1D. They're virtually identical. The only difference is the coffin feed water in this and the Lesko feed water in this thing. But otherwise, they're basically identical. So there are. The BLI Hudson looks really good. You know, the Broadway Limited did a really good job, in my opinion. However, there are still some shortcomings. Noticeably, this is plastic. So, you know, there are some molded on plumbing, piping, which personally does not really bother me. But that being said, like, for example, if you look at this area, you know, it's definitely sort of plasticky looking. This is all molded on right there. Again, it doesn't bother me at all personally, but I know some people prefer the brass look, despite the fact that the Mizunos are actually rather bare in this area. You can see this is much more bare compared to, you know, that. So, anyways, the plastic is a limitation, but I don't really consider that a problem. There are some bigger differences. Noticeably, well, this thing has a much better back head, which I can't really show you guys, unfortunately, but the one big thing about ready-to-run engines is manufacturers like Broadway Limited are forced to make these engines be able to run on really tight curves. You know, they're designed to give up some accuracy and tolerances to achieve a better performing engine on, like, you know, for example, really crappy track. And so one thing that Broadway Limited has done is increase the amount of space both in the front and rear trucks. So, okay, so I don't really know if I could show this properly, but you can kind of see. Let me actually take my camera out of the tripod here. You can actually kind of see there's a whole lot of space underneath that front truck, which kind of looks a little plasticky. I mean, not much, honestly, it doesn't bother me, but you can kind of see how the leading truck could be a little bit bigger. And also the trailing truck. Move this over. You can see, you know, there's quite a lot of space there. Now, again, that doesn't really bother me unless we look directly at it. But that being said, if you compare it to the West Side engine, you can see that the leading truck, it looks much more closely spaced, which definitely looks nicer. Although, again, this engine is much more, it requires better track to run smooth, otherwise it'll derail. And you can see that the trailing truck is a whole lot better. Yeah. That's something that you really can't improve on from the BLI engine. But honestly, otherwise, besides that, it looks really good. The detail is neck to neck, in my opinion. And granted, a lot of the details on the BLI, or some of the details, are molded on. There's a surprising amount of separately applied stuff, like this here, all this is separately applied, which is really impressive. You know, this here is molded on, but who really cares? It looks really good. But just from any point of view, I really don't like the white balance. Jesus, this camera. Anyways, yeah, the detail just looks really good. I think it's very comparable to brass, which is pretty crazy. Yeah, so BLI did a really good job on this Hudson. I think with my, you know, modifications and upgrades, I think it looks a whole lot better. Yeah, my phone, this is an iPhone, by the way. iPhones struggle with white balance, Jesus. Anyways, yeah, I think BLI did a really good job, and this Hudson looks absolutely gorgeous in my opinion. Yeah, there's a few more things with the tender I'm going to show you guys real quick, and then I'll call it off here. So their choice of font for New York Central is kind of strange to me. The Gothic lettering looks correct, but the Roman lettering looks wrong. So this is correct. If you look at prototype photos, this is proper Roman lettering. This looks oddly stretched. It looks kind of weird to me. Anyways, that's something that doesn't bother me too much personally, but I do know that it looks kind of strange. The tender here, I don't know exactly this kind of tender is. It's a 14,000 gallon tender, but this is the standard Hudson style tender. It is missing the rear pilot. As you can see, all New York Central Hudsons had a rear, basically like a cowcatcher pilot thing. These are missing. Interestingly, the PT tenders actually have the pilot in the back, but the Hudson ones are missing, probably because of a space issue. Again, there are constraints with making ready-to-run engines, and just to give this rear truck a little bit more wiggle room, they probably just removed it or just ignored it. Yeah. And the very last thing, and this is a very minor critique, but all New York Central engines with Alesco feed water heaters, so this is, you know, the J1D, the L2A, the H10, etc. Any engine from New York Central with an Alesco feed water heater, they had an Alesco oil skimmer in the tender. Apparently, oil in the water would mess up the Alesco feed water heaters, and so all engines with Alesco would have a slightly stuck out cylinder up here. It would like, it's not this here, but it would basically sit on top of this, and it looked like a flat pancake and sit on top of here, and basically it would just skim the oil off of the water in the tender. Now, this is correct because this has a coffin feed water heater again, so this is missing it, which is correct, but these should have it. The J1Ds, and also these as well, they should have an oil skimmer. I can actually pull up a photo. I'll be right back. Okay, you can see it here, this little thing right here. That's an oil skimmer. So this would be basically placed on any engine with any engine's tender with Alesco feed water heaters. So this one's missing as well. This one will be accurate because this is a coffin feed water heater engine. But yeah, that's a very minor detail that BLI missed. I might add it myself in the future. I think there's a brass part for it. Probably costs like $6-7. I could just paint it black and install it. It's not that big of a deal, but I figured I'd mention it for those diehard New York Central fans out there. But otherwise, again, I really think Broadway Limited did a really good job with the Hudson, especially considering this tooling is so old and it was their first ever engine made. This engine looks beautiful now. I think the graphite smoke box looks so much better. And yeah. Anyways, I just wanted to show off my work today because I'm really proud of the modifications and how much they've improved the appearance of the engine. And I figured I'd share with you guys. So yeah. Apologies for the weird white balance end of the video. I hope you guys can ignore that. And I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions or comments, please comment down below. If you have any opinions or anything you want to tell me, or any questions, again, comments sections right there. So I'm usually really good about answering comments. So yeah. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.